Hello, you're watching CNN and this is Connect the World with me, Lynda Kinkade. Welcome back. Let's turn to Iraq now. The Sunni terror group ISIS is claiming it carried out a second day of attacks, appearing to target Shiite Muslims. It says one of its attackers blew up a car at a gathering of Shiite security forces. Then as people arrived to help, a second suicide bomber struck. At least 11 people were killed and 13 others were wounded. They're part of a recent wave of bombings across the country. And of course it comes as the capital Baghdad remains in a state of emergency after enraged protesters broke into the heavily fortified Green Zone on Saturday. And as you're seeing, they got inside Parliament. Let's bring in CNN's Wedeman now, who joins me from Rome, who has, of course, reported extensively from the Middle East. Ben, a great deal of anger there in Baghdad. What is fueling this anger?
What's fueling it at the moment, of course, is anger at corruption, which seems to be something that Iraq simply cannot kick. We know that Prime Minister al-Abadi last summer, after similar protests, had promised to crack down on corruption. And yesterday he was supposed to hold a vote in Parliament in which a new cabinet would be appointed, not on the basis of sectarian affiliation, which is the system that was set up by the Americans going back to the time, 2003-2004, but he wanted to appoint a technocrat cabinet. But of course, the members of the Iraqi parliament, who are the main beneficiaries of the current system of government, have resisted that effort tooth and nail. So they could not even, there wasn't even a quorum to hold that vote. So that really sparked the protesters to go inside the Green Zone to occupy Parliament. Now we know, for instance, that 70 members of Parliament, mostly Kurdish and Sunni members, have fled to northern Iraq as a result of those protests. In fact, as some of them were driving outside of the Green Zone, their cars were pelted by rocks from angry protesters. At this point, Prime Minister al-Abadi has sworn that these protesters who occupied Parliament will be arrested, but we understand no arrests have been made. And at this point, it's anybody's guess what's going to happen next in Baghdad, since the government seems to be teetering on collapse. And the protesters are continuing to demand, not surprisingly, that a new government be formed and that corruption be crushed. But that, of course, is perhaps mission impossible in a country where, according to Transparency International, it ranks 161 out of 168 countries when it comes to corruption. Lynda?
So, Ben, what does Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi need to do to hold on to power and also to restore a sense of calm and order there?
Well, what he needs to do is show that he can walk the walk as opposed to just talk the talk when it comes to corruption, that he needs to show that he can form a government that will take decisive action to change the situation. But that is really almost mission impossible. You have to realize that, for instance, the Green Zone, for many Iraqis, symbolizes much of what is wrong with Iraq. The Green Zone, you can only get in if you've got special pass, special permission, and life within the Green Zone, for instance, when the rest of Baghdad is suffering from water cuts, electricity cuts, insecurity, violence, and whatnot, the Green Zone, the lights never go off there. It's a very safe area where people, the few people who are lucky to have access to it, to perhaps live inside of it, live a life of luxury unimaginable to people outside. Now, how he can change all of that, I don't know, but he certainly is going to try. But with a government that's falling apart, with security forces that can't really secure government institutions, it's going to be a tall order.
It certainly is. Great to have your perspective on all of this. Ben Wedeman joining us live from Rome. Thank you. Iraq is proving to be a puzzle almost impossible to solve. Remember, it's been 13 years since former dictator Saddam Hussein was toppled. Let's get some more analysis now from Renad Monsour, a fellow researcher at the Carnegie Middle Easter Center. He's with us from Beirut via Skype. Great to have you with us. Some commentators say this is the worst political crisis since the US-led invasion and the fall of Saddam Hussein. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it's clear today that a precedent has been set, and that is structural change is required. No more talk of reforms, no more simple rhetoric. There's clearly a mandate now that al-Abadi, the Prime Minister of Iraq, has to change the structure. And it's really the first time that that structure that was set in 2003 is being challenged to this point. It's the first time that you have protesters moving all the way inside the Green Zone, inside Parliament, and demanding for change. And it's really a show of force from the protesters and those that, for example, are led by the Shia cleric Muqtada Sadr, saying that we did demand change, but not only change, but we demand change now. And we need to recall that yesterday's, storming of the parliament was in direct reaction for many of the protests, in reaction to the parliament coming up with a decision to delay the cabinet reshuffle until May the 10th. So clearly we want change, we want it now. And I think insofar as that is the case, it's clearly a major point in post-2003 Iraq. And
if there are not any changes, if it stays as is, what's the likelihood, do you think, that the Prime Minister will be overthrown?
Yeah, I mean, for al-Abadi, for the Prime Minister, he's facing a lot of challenges, both external and internal. Within his own party, one of the strongest leaders, for example, former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, is looking for a vacuum, is looking for Parliament to dissolve so that he and his group can come back into power. And on the outside, you have, led by Muqtada Sadr, a very strong popular movement now that's also demanding for change. So he's kind of stuck in between these two forces, one that's looking for him to fail and one that's making him have to change. And at the same time, you then have this group of elite who have been benefiting from the post-2003 muhassasa, they call it, the structure of communal patronage. And they fear that any sort of new system, they may lose their privileges, and even worse, a lot of them may actually be in a lot of trouble, legal trouble, because of what change might entail.
The US, of course, is no doubt watching this very closely. It, in recent times, has been more optimistic about fighting against ISIS within Iraq, clawing back territory. But there must be a lot of concern. How much more of a challenge will there be in fighting ISIS if the Iraqi government, as it stands, is struggling to hold power?
Yeah, well, I mean, on the surface, it clearly seems like this is a major setback to the fight against ISIS. But actually, there's a contrary point here. We've all been saying for a very long time that the way to defeat ISIS is to win back those Iraqis who don't have faith in the government. You need a political solution. You need some sort of political reform to convince those in Mosul and elsewhere that might be supporting or, at the very least, indifferent to the Islamic State to move away from them. And so this might be actually a way to open up the political wing to the fight against ISIS by trying to restructure a system that has been failing for more than 13 years.
Renad Monsour, we'll have to leave it there for now, but great to have your analysis on all of that. We appreciate it.